Welcome to Peace Building Initiatives with Jose Barzola. Peace Building Initiatives are collaborative ways of developing healthy, positive relationships via dialogue, cross-cultural understanding, and exploring ways to shift our own perspective to build compassion and empathy within our communities. Thank you for joining us today. On today's episode, we have Dr. Yud Antoni Yapin, who brings over a quarter century of experience as a professor at California State University, Sacramento, where she's renowned for her interdisciplinary approach to teaching and her unwavering commitment to social justice, ethical integrity, and legal advocacy. With academic credentials that include a PhD in social welfare and a Juris Doctor that bridges the field of law and social work to cultivate meaningful change within both academic and community settings. Her teachings emphasize real-world applications, particularly in capstone projects and evaluation research, where students are empowered to integrate critical inquiry with ethical action. Through this work, she fosters lifelong learning, integrative thinking, and professional accountability. Dr. Antonia Yapin is also deeply engaged in faculty development and institutional improvements, having completed advanced training in quality learning and teaching, QLT, AI-enhanced pedagogy, and accreditation processes. Beyond her academic and professional roles, she considers her great accomplishments to be raising her three children in love, nurturing them into joyful, self-actualized, and responsible adults. Her two granddaughters serve as daily reminders of the beauty of life and the presence of the divine in all things. A passionate educator, advocate, and mother, Dr. Anna Yapin lives her values with humility, purpose, and deep appreciation for the transformative power of education and love. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. And to kind of get us started, I have a couple questions and then we'll just kind of see where the conversation goes. And might you share a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to pursue both social welfare and law, which is such a unique, it makes sense as far as,
Mhm.
some of the issues that are happening, but just what inspired you to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, first of all, for that lovely introduction. And it's very thoughtful, and you put it well so together. And that's actually me. It's not hyperbole. So thank you. And so it's, deeply encouraging that another human being can see that and acknowledge that. So thank you. Yes, my life journey. I am from India, you know, and I grew up in the first part of my maybe 5 or 6 years of my life in a joint family where my father and his brothers and my paternal grandparents, we all lived in one home. So there was the sense of shared love that was, present almost the whole time. And my grandmother was a very uh, innately powerful human being. And my grandfather was a highly ethical, simple human being. So that combination kept the household constantly in a dialogue of, discussing their business interests, their ways of child rearing, and all of that. However, when I was about 6 years, my family moved to in the same village, but a different place and started their own nuclear family. My father and mother and myself and my brother. My sister wasn't born yet. And so that place was exactly at the tip of the entire village is at the tip of India. But this place sat on a hill. It was owned by what is called as the London Mission Society, and the British were in India. And so my father initially rented it from them and then bought the whole thing later on. And so that's where I grew up. And my journey actually starts there because the unique feature of that place was you can see literally millions of stars. I have never seen that many stars when you look up at the sky in any other place in my entire life. And there was a lighthouse on one side, but the light, as it turned, when the light turned on the other side, you can see all these stars. And my mom, who did not even complete eighth grade, would, had this phenomenal understanding of life and what it means. And she was a brilliant woman. And so she would look at me and say, "Do you see those stars?" And I say, "Yes, of course." And so she would say, "And remember, we are just going around one of those stars. And we are one of nine planets going around those stars. And so, no matter what your difficulties are, don't make it seem like bigger than you because you are part of that star. You came from there and you're part of that infinity. And that is God. And my family is traditionally Catholic, and she was an ardent Catholic and very much someone who lived by the beliefs of Jesus Christ, by the teachings of Jesus Christ. And so for her, that was the power of Jesus, everything that was manifest in the universe. And so she was saying, when you identify with that power, nothing is problematic. Everything is manageable. Everything is exactly the way it should be. So align yourself with that and you'll be fine. So live in infinity. That was her teaching. And I saw that, but at the same time, the practical realities of the life in my compound, because this was actually a big compound the London Mission Society owned. Well, relatively big. It was only about 5 or 6 acres, but it had property around that. But it had a big, wall around it. And then my father, when he built the house, he built another compound inside that. So I was brought up very protected. And my father was by that time he had become relatively successful businessman. But the way the workers were treated, including the household workers, and the way those who, worked in his business, and that did not seem as and aligned with Catholic social teaching, if you will. I didn't at that time. I didn't know Catholic social teaching, but everything I listened to at the Catholic Church, like the Beatitudes, for instance, because my mom went to church every day, and she took me with her until I went to Catholic girls only boarding school in my 8th grade. So I went with her to church every day, and I knew by this time the Bible almost by heart. And so the Beatitudes was my most favorite part of the Bible. And so, blessed are those, poor in spirit. Blessed are those who hunger after justice and righteousness. And all of that, just seemed like there are two parallel streams of living, even in accordance with the Catholic social teaching. So one day it all came together. Maybe I was maybe in 10 or 11 years old. I don't remember exactly. But my mom and I came back from church, and there was this small crowd of people, and my father was there. And there was this really scared man in the center. And he had been brought up because he apparently stole some coconuts from somebody else's coconut groves. When I say coconut groves, these are huge properties that many people during that time, this was like maybe 53 years ago, they owned. And every coconut grove, they're called tenandobu in my language. It's like a proper property with the hundreds of coconut trees. And that was, they're cultivating. And he had stolen some coconuts, and every coconut grove had someone guarding that property, and he was in one of the adjacent property, not my father's property. This was away from this place, there was part of the village where there were all coconut groves, and this was from there. And his fear was so intense. I saw that coming from church, and I was literally moved to tears. And everybody was shouting, "Oh, he stole the coconuts, stole the coconuts." Then my father was also, besides being a successful, he was also like, navigating the process of village justice. They didn't go to court, didn't go to lawyers. They brought the most cases to him of this sort, small things and family conflicts. And so he said, "Well, how many coconuts did he steal?" Or something to that effect, he asked. But the fear on the man's face was etched in my memory. Then finally, they all decided, well, he should be asked to leave his post at the coconut grove. But my mother called him over, and as was her custom, gave him rice. I remember rice and other things for him to live because he doesn't have a job. And I thought about it. How is it going to help him? This provisions that my mom is giving, although she was doing it, in the goodness of her heart, in the Catholic spirit, and now he doesn't have a job. And nobody asked him why he stole the coconuts, although he kept saying his children didn't have anything to eat. And well, they're given a home, little home in those properties to live. But nobody bothered to know, do they have other job? It's their job to protect the property. Do they, have access to the coconut within their own property? Why would he steal coconut from someone else's property if what he was getting from guarding that property was sufficient for him? So I realized there could be, the Christian spirit, as my mom, demonstrated, which is in the form of social welfare, charity, kind, and social welfare in our Western context originated from that spirit of service and through voluntary organizations. And now we have, made it as part of governing and part of, a legitimate social welfare policy. And so I thought there has to be justice in the interest of people who deserve justice. It's not just, alleviative measures, but preventive measures that empower people ought to be the process. And so that convinced in me the desire to do service and do justice. So service and justice. So when I was for my undergraduate, I was sent to this, again, girls only Catholic college called St. Mary's College, which is known to be almost like where you send your daughters, the parents can just relax, nothing will happen to them because they're so strict. They even open our letters that our own parents sent, but openly, and then, give it to you to make sure that you have no contact with anyone. You cannot go anyone without being chaperoned or until your parents come. So there we were able to be introduced to an organization called, as part of the nuns, Catholic social teaching, All India Catholic University Federation of Students. And there, some of the Jesuit priests talked about, injustice and, social dynamics in India. There were plenty of injustice. Now, of course, India is a growing economy, and their annual growth rate is projected to be 7%. They've surpassed their own colonizer, UK, in terms of their, growth rate and the size of the economy. But that doesn't mean that it translates into per capita GDP and all that stuff. But nevertheless, they're growing. But when I was during my formative years, the level of poverty in India was extreme. And the level of illiteracy was extreme. So I was very impacted by that. And the Jesuit priest introduced those concepts. So I said, when I came home, I want to go to one of those villages where the Jesuit priests work and work with them. My father, of course, literally lost it and said, what are you talking about? You're unmarried and, you're not going anywhere. If you want to do social work, study social work. So when I finished graduating from my undergraduate program, while they were trying to, look for alliances, arrange marriage and all that, in India, they sent me to start another Catholic girls only college is called Stella Maris College in a big city, where to do masters in social work. That's why I ended up in social work. And I wanted to do law. I said, why don't they wouldn't hear of it. I mean, the legal profession itself was looked down upon at that time. And for a girl, because no, everyone, I was a girl actually, who's not married, is talked about as a girl, not as a young woman, to stand in front of strangers and argue cases. That was for my family absolute no. So essentially, I got my master's, and then things happened. I went to Delhi and to do my MPhil, as they called it, and then they saw I was sort of brilliant, and gave me temporary faculty position. Then they hired me in a 10-year track position. And so I was a 10-year faculty member, the youngest 10-year faculty member at that time at the University of Delhi in Delhi School of Social Work. So I was there for 4 years. Then I met my future husband, an American, who came there to work with Tibetan refugees. And so I had already done research with Afghan and Iranian refugees. So we were introduced by the head of my department. And so I managed the Tibetan refugees community development as well. And then we got married and I came here and, of course, our marriage lasted for 13 years and I would have lived in that, marriage and continued if I realized that it's not, when I realized it's not in the best interest of my children. We divorced amicably and I got custody of my children and I became a single mom. And so when my children were grown, I never left that dream of becoming a lawyer. And they were all well established. My daughter is a diplomat. My son had got his law degree too, a Juris Doctor degree. My youngest one has his master's degree in film studies. And I thought this is the time to do my law degree. So I started it, quite late. And international law was my passion and compliance because so I finished my Juris Doctor degree, and so that's how I ended up in both the disciplines. But I see tremendous, crossover between the disciplines. I truly believe in order to be a good lawyer, you have to have understanding of social welfare policies, our social system, anti-racist diversity, equity, inclusion approach, human rights framework. And in order to be a good social worker, I believe you need to understand the legal framework, starting with its history, beginning with the Dred Scott decision. How did that come about? And all of those, and the historical injustices that we were perpetrated through the legal system, and how can, conflict resolution, mediation, arbitration, and if all else fails, we go to litigation. That's where I am, and that's why I'm passionate about conflict resolution and negotiation as a technique built within these processes.
Thank you so much for that insightful, little background, and thank you for opening up and sharing about your multiple layers of your life. So definitely, it's an honor to be here with you. Thank you also for just devoting the time to further your knowledge base and not letting, I commend you, and it's admirable that, you're a lifelong learner and you're continually trying to see what other tools can you add to your tool belt to better serve the community. And I think that's really what it's about. So thank you so much for that. I know you talked a little bit about or kind of leading up into spiritual intelligence. Wondering if you want to, you know, educate us a little more about that. And I wonder if this might be coincides also with like you served over 25 years at California State University, Sacramento. How has your teaching evolved over that time?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking. I got my doctorate degree from University of California at Berkeley, which is like one of the topmost research institutions in the world. And for my discipline, I loved my experience there. It was almost spiritual because they were so involved in what they were teaching and doing. There was no conflict of personal values over professional integrity. They lived that experience and they valued our independence. My professors, although I had been a professor and not a professor, but tenured faculty member in India, a lecturer, but tenured lecturer because I was still so young. I was just rising through the ranks when I resigned my job in order to be able to come to America, because I got married to an American. So that experience of the dignity of academic pursuit and the encouragement given to my independence of thought, was so refreshing that I completely immersed myself in my doctoral experience. And I remember by that time, I have had my three children as well. I didn't come to the United States and then go to Berkeley to do my doctorate, but I went there primarily as a livelihood. I thought, I mean, although I have this degree from India in order to teach here, in order to be able to support my children, I need to have a strong livelihood and the time that would be necessary to raise my children. So I wanted to have a doctoral degree from a reputable institution so I could get a job soon after I graduated. So that was my goal. And as it turned out, I loved that experience. So, and the Howard Gardner, I don't know whether you're familiar with him. He's a psychologist who wrote enormously about in multiple intelligences. And so we have this, IQ, intelligence quotient, which is abstract intelligence. And he also talked about integrative intelligence and kinesthetic intelligence, music intelligence. I was so impressed with that because I saw others, some, not so much at Berkeley, but in other forums where I went to present papers or, share knowledge, that someone might be an expert in one area, but they absolutely lack the emotional intelligence or the capacity to understand someone else's culture within the framework of that person's culture. And that requires a cultural competence and so social intelligence. So putting it all together, we need the power of the human spirit. But one thing I, didn't share with you while I was discussing my journey was when I went to Delhi, my parents had, something happened. And so, in terms of my, their expectations of me getting into an arranged marriage and all that. So in order to, on the condition that I will not, go anywhere outside the parameters of their choosing in terms of my marriage or anything like that. They allowed me to go to Delhi, which was a big thing. So I kept my promise and honor. So, and Delhi, in the South, we have different languages. My parents are bilingual, Malayalam and Tamil. And in Delhi, it's Hindi. So I learned Hindi to speak. And the medium of instruction is English in the university level. So that wasn't a problem. But so I was dealing with all of these processes, and so I kept to my room in my, when I was doing the MPhil. This was before I was offered the position there, and I read the Bible all over again, just the New Testament. And it occurred to me Christ was teaching us not just dogma, but practical ways of living, and that the power of the Spirit. And so, in order for me to make sense of everything that was happening, my own perceptions of social factors, I had to rely on my own spiritual, sort of coherence, for lack of a better word, the sense of cohesiveness. And that to me is spiritual intelligence. I mean, I know others have written about spiritual intelligence from a Christ perspective, like Villota, who is, I think it's a Bethel church. He's a pastor there, and he wrote some really good things in Redding, California. But that is primarily from Christian perspective. But I thought, not just Christ, but Buddha was also talking about this coherence. Krishna in Hindu religion was talking about this coherence. And the Bodhisattva in Tibetan background was talking about this coherence that guides us through everything. To me, that's spiritual intelligence. And when I gave birth to my children, I'm not sure whether that's the experience of other mothers, but I literally thought I saw God. I had, natural birth with all my in hospitals, but with natural birth, I didn't have, C-section or anything else. So maybe the relief of all that pain, because there's nothing like child labor pain, and I don't know what it is, but I felt I saw God. I know for an academic to say that it is counterintuitive. We are not supposed to even talk about, it. But it was phenomenally calming, phenomenally in alignment with who I was. It was freeing experience. And I looked at my child. My daughter was my first, born, and then my oldest, and then my second son. Each time I looked at them, and it seemed like they came from God. And I had read Khalil Gibran's poems, and one of his poems was, even before I had my children, was my favorite, which is on children. He said, "Your children are not your children. No, they come through you, but not of you. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. Their souls live in the future." I'm just paraphrasing next ones. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, but their thoughts are literally, I felt like I gave birth to them. They've been inside me for 9.5 months. And with all my children, this is another thing, with all my three children, my labor, the doctors would, my, gynecologist would say, "Oh, the due date is such and such," and they're not coming out. And I'm like, "Well, what is happening?" And then my ex-husband, my children's father would say, "Well, they like it too much inside you. They don't want to come out." And so, I thought, but they were part of me, inside me, breathing through me, and now they're outside. But yet, they are this magnificent beings of their own. And so to me, we all have that capacity for unique value. My first thought was, how can a human being take another for granted? That was my thought with each of my childbirth. We are all so wonderfully unique, extraordinary people of spirit and power, but something in the society that makes us mundane and mediocre and ordinary. So I took a vow, I'm not going to allow that to happen. They're going to be this extraordinary people. So I did everything in my power, although I was the only one who immigrated from my family from India. So when I had to divorce my children's father, I was practically with very little support system. And I had to do all that. But that made me very strong. and I attribute it to my spiritual intelligence, really. And I don't know, I can write about spiritual intelligence. In fact, I'm writing a book with a colleague of mine on integrative intelligence because we don't want to call it spiritual. Well, that is a term that Gardner used as well, integrative intelligence, which is the capacity to bring back our approaches to life, our capacities for growth, and our capacities for perceiving new opportunities, and our capacity for appreciating life and appreciating others as equally valuable as ourselves. And then we will not be able to diminish any human being in our interaction, right? If we really acknowledge them as equally valuable as ourselves, how can we diminish them? And if we look at our societies, in all societies, problems arise when human beings try to diminish others as less than themselves or dehumanize others. So I think spiritual intelligence, not so much as calling it a spiritual intelligence. In fact, one of my friends who is an expert on appreciative inquiry, he says he's so tired of all this integrative intelligence, cultural intelligence, social intelligence. If he hears about one more intelligence, he's going to get nauseated. And so, but I think spiritual intelligence is a real capacity to appreciate and not differentiate us, but the understanding the uniqueness within that larger framework of humanity. And I bring that to my work, and how has it impacted my teaching? Well, when I came from Berkeley, I went to in East Carolina University. My first 3 years, I ended up not even finished my dissertation, but I needed a job, and it was all but dissertation. So I went there. Then while there in my first year, I finished my dissertation and graduated, got my PhD. So during those 3 years, I was still following the Berkeley model, which is give enormous list of readings, expect your students to do that. And I realized, my master's students, I was teaching primarily master's students on one or two classes in undergraduate studies, were actually in social work were very different from my cohort in Berkeley. They all had caring responsibilities, almost all of them, I shouldn't say all, and they had a job that they were working, and they were, from middle class, economic background, and they were struggling. So for me to expect them to do all those readings and to, mark them as not doing well was a useless strategy. So I was gradually introducing this concept called student-centered teaching. How do we appreciate the student's experience, although they might be one of the 25 students in the class, or because we have in social work a class limit, size limit, and for graduate classes, you cannot have more than 25. Now, for some classes, not even more than 12 students. So I was able to get to know each of my students well, their struggles, and more so at Sac State when I came to Sac State, because Sac State is a phenomenal place. California State University, Sacramento, we affectionately call it as Sac State. It's a public university with around anywhere averaging from 28,000 to 30,000 students a year. But there are enormous amount of resources for students, and we value diversity, and we value the sense of belonging that students have. So I fit in very well. Although with faculty and colleagues, you have differences of opinion and you struggle with those. And just as academia in general, if there are 13 professors, there are 13 schools of thought, as they say. But we appreciate each other. So social work to me was a sacred profession. And so I really bought into it, and I applied that concept of each being unique and each being holding the capacity for growth, enormous growth and change into my students as well. So that's how it changed. And towards my, later years of teaching, I even gave, multiple opportunities for my students to rewrite their paper to the criticism of some of my colleagues. And so say you're too much hand holding. They are at the master's level. I said, if they need the hand holding, we might as well hold them, because if they did not need that, why would they ask our help? The fact that they ask our help, trust that we can help them, is a great indication of studentship. So if my student wrote a paper that is going to get a fail grade, I would say these are all things that you need to do and integrate with your learning and rewrite it. Some of my students wrote 4 versions or 5 versions, and for the fifth version, I don't deduct any point. I give a straight A. And then they're shocked. So, like, I want you to go into the world as a A-level practitioner, not like a C-level practitioner, especially you're going to work with vulnerable populations as a professional social worker, people who have been given situations where they are constantly being asked to give up their faith in their capacities to solve their problems. You're going to help them solve their problems. Therefore, you need to learn how to work with individuals and groups and communities at an A level. Sorry, B level will not do. C level will not do. I'm going to help you here. I'm going to be here to help you reach that. And most students like that, but there are students, of course, who are brilliant and who sometimes felt like I'm slowing down the pace of complex learning, as they called it, because I'm adhering to every student's need. It's not possible. Of course, no, nobody's going to like everything you do, but I still believe in student-centered learning. I believe project-based learning. I believe in the internalization of competencies instead of just learning something, memorizing and regurgitating. So even when I gave multiple choice exams, it was all case-based, and they have unlimited number of attempts. Eventually, I reduced it to 3 because sometimes they will think, "Oh, I have unlimited attempts," and they will not fully engage with the process. And so, to me, assessment has to be formative, and assessment has to be empowering and not fear-inducing. How can you have fear in a learning environment? That's a question I ask. But in my law school, it was completely different. It's all about fear. They want you to memorize stuff and regurgitate it. You're supposed to follow a Socratic method of learning, and you have 100 students, 75 students in class. How are you going to be able to assess, gauge where every student is? And so those who are domineering in their approach and articulating, which I could easily be because I joined law school after I've been an experienced professor, but I would still pretend to be dumb sometimes just to, see what is the level of tolerance for perceived, not so, what shall I say, on top of the things, because the categorization begins in law school almost immediately after, that they have this curve method and only a certain number of students can be given an A. So there is all categorization and placing students in a hierarchy of order, which is not in the best interest of the students or the process. And so we see it with all the incompetent, unethical lawyers floating around. We just have to look around and you know where they come from. From the not any particular school, but the way they're trained to be. I mean, legal profession should be just as sacred as social profession, where you have respect for the rule of law, where you have respect for due process, where you have respect for fairness, you have respect for representing your clients with a zeal and with a confidentiality, with absolutely no conflict of interest. I mean, an equality before the law. It should be a cardinal principles. We don't see that. I mean, there are lawyers. I know lawyers who are very good lawyers. Even in my, the university that I got my law degree from, there are many lawyers who are extremely principled, and because it's a Catholic university, and so and they value all those Catholic social teaching. But the law schools across the nation, well, I'll stop short of saying the legal profession needs enormous level of reform because we just got it from our colonizer, which is UK, their legal mechanisms, and we still have that in place. We have made some progress in our statutory framework and how we apply, but at the same time, remember in 1857 we had the Dred Scott decision, and so and we have come a long way since then. I mean, Brown versus Board of Education and so on and so forth. But Taney, who read the majority opinion in Dred Scott, his statue was at the Congress, because the Supreme Court used to meet at the Capitol before until they had their own building, and Taney's statue was there. And I hope how many have read the ruling of Dred Scott, where they declared that because his Scott's ancestors were brought as slaves to United States. Because he was born as a slave, he does not have the rights that citizens of United States have. Therefore, although he had been in a state that had given freedom to those who were born as slaves, when he moved to a state that had the practice of slavery, he became robbed of the rights to freedom and citizens. But of course, with the 13th and 14th Amendment, we, have this citizenship. Everyone who was born in the United States is a citizen. And now we are seeing this whole process of questioning that birthright citizenship. And so I'm wondering how many of my classmates are thinking of the class we had in constitutional law and when we discussed Dred Scott and wondering, my God, have we come to this and what is happening to 13th and 14th amendments, and that we held almost as sacred as in accordance with our foundational principles of liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness that for every human being. So I mean, that's where I draw a lot of connection between my legal, understanding of how societies ought to uh, give justice and develop or and interpret legal provisions in equity considerations, because we do have what is called equity, the law of equity, which is, even though we have legal principles, if interpreting them strictly would produce unjust outcomes, we do have to consider equity into that process. And that is, the law of equity. But I don't know how many apply it and how many keep up with it. And now with the AI, of course, I mean, legal tech, I have, following that and, sort of practicing that, using it for legal analysis. It's just unbelievable. We don't need associates anymore in law firms because AI could produce, literally go through cases and precedents and generate, briefs. Of course, you have to check it because sometimes the citations are not accurate. That could, give you an understanding of the level of legal analysis that one would develop only after years of practice and learning. And so AI is changing all of our expectations regarding how we do legal analysis. So when you talk about my continuous learning, I think everyone has to continuously learn. Otherwise, we are going to be relegated to ignorance, right, at least in the pace with which we practice, and not be able to serve our clients, whether it's social work or law or in any other profession.
Thank
Did I
you.
answer your
Yeah, no,
question?
you did, and so much more. And thank you for, you know, you took us on this beautiful journey of, uh, just everything from what you do in the classroom to how you're pushing against the norm. You brought up how so many times I reflected upon like, we're conditioned in education, K through 12, and even in higher education to show up to a class. Okay, I received a syllabus. I need to now adapt to my writing or the work that I do to what the instructor, the faculty, the professor wants. So we learn the art of like pivoting and being chameleons and
Mhm.
you know but do we truly find our voice is one of the things I'm hearing. And so thank you for, throwing a little curveball to students, and I hope they've been receptive. And I find students are very much, as I teach, I find that they love interactiveness. They love the opportunity to share their voice, to not just do the routine, oh, here's a lecture coming on. Um, and so it sounds like that's truly what you're doing. But
Mhm.
at the same time, you're pushing against the grain of like there's these restrictions like in law school that everyone has to receive, only a certain percentage can receive certain grades.
Yeah.
And so there's a larger institute. You kind of you brought us to the watering hole of like, yeah, it's colonialism. There's so many different structures embedded in our everyday life that remnants of colonialism that uh so how do we go about, changing that or possibly finding an opportunity to I guess I mean I've thought about this myself of like am I doing this because this is the right way or this is just the only way I've been shown. So having to constantly add that critical thinking, that questioning, the curiosity in a way of like, is this the best way? And you talked about being a parent, which I can relate to as well. And so I always think about, we are our own worst critic. And so always being kind to ourselves, even during challenging times, especially during challenging times. But looking at those opportunities for growth and how we can lean
Mhm.
into that discomfort and come out better from that. And, you brought it to modern day and what's happening in our political sphere nowadays. And so, thank you. Thank you for that. And
You're welcome.
I'm gonna, I will mold a question out of uh, all of this, but this is kind of like a two-part because you delved a little bit into this, but would love to learn more about it. But uh, so yes, you've been motivated to commitment to interdisciplinary education, which is wonderful. Maybe share a little bit about how do you see it benefiting your students today, and also a two-part of like you completed training QLT methods and teaching with AI tools. How have those technologies changed your approach to education? Love to
Yeah,
see
yeah,
what kind
oh,
of.
absolutely.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And so, as I told you, like, I'm 66 years old now. I just turned 66. So I took early retirement even before. And so we have a system at California State University where, we have faculty early retirement program where we can participate in it and teach only two classes in the entire year, or two classes, yeah, each semester, or you can teach all four classes in one semester. So, and you can do that for 5 years. I did that. And so subsequently, if there is a need arises, you can teach. And so, which I did, but I'm not teaching this semester. I did not teach last semester, but until before last semester, I taught. And the capstone project class that I taught, in the semester before last year, is a class that I created, when I was in 2008, along with a colleague of mine, because we have what is called a culminating experience requirement in order for our master's students to graduate, where they have to demonstrate how they have integrated all the 9 competencies that are required by our accrediting body, which is the Council of Social Work Education. And those competencies are very thorough. So the culminating experience normally was a project or a thesis, which students sort of did as a hoop to jump through without really, fully engaged in it. So my colleague and I thought, why don't we help our students evaluate their own practice? And evaluation research, which is like competency 4, which is a research informed practice and practice informed research. Because we are evidence based professionals. Ours is an evidence based profession. So we developed that course. Believe me, it is the most arduous process in a public institution that has a well established grad studies department to change the culminating experience requirement to a course. We had to first develop an experimental course and teach it and collect the data and then get it approved through our the department's curriculum committee, then the university's curriculum committee. Then you go to faculty senate and faculty senate has to approve it. And then the graduate study. So it was a long process. We
Nothing
did
like good
all
old
that.
bureaucracy in higher education.
Yeah, I mean, no, I sort of like it because, it was very hard. It is bureaucratic, but all these checks and balances ensured that we are complying with our accrediting body's requirements. And our own university's grad studies has their own requirements in terms of what competencies our grad students should have when they leave us. So it's a well-respected program. So consequently, when we started teaching this course, students absolutely loved it. They loved it. And nobody wanted to do thesis or project. There was almost a line forming to take these courses. But there are some faculty said, well, we can't do away with those options. So we would limit the capstone projects to maybe 2 sections or 3 sections. And then anyway, it has evolved over a period of time. So I developed that course. I am, sort of attached to that course. And it is primarily evaluation research, right? And so, like, that's 2 semesters ago when I taught, it's a year-long course. So it starts in the fall and goes until the spring semester. Some of the topics that my students did their evaluation research are on, a systematic review of the aptitude to using substance as a comorbid condition of autism, and another one did on the students do it in form of dyad, so they have a partner to work with, and we also model collaborative working style, and they both work equally on all of that. They both have to develop a literature review. They both have to collect data, or if they're using secondary data to understand the nature of the data, what variables they would select for analysis. Of course, I work with them consistently throughout the process, and so then they analyze the data and analyze the data on impact of COVID-19, mechanisms and a role of attendance in academic achievement. I mean, how did students deal with the isolation process, the online education mechanisms during the COVID-19, period? And so there are several. And another student did, for instance, on the impact of community health centers on positive health outcomes of marginalized population. So the reason why I'm sharing these topics are they range from micro level interventions evaluation to meso level to macro level. Micro level at the individual level, meso level to communities and group level, at macro level at the societal level. What should we be focusing on? The families should not be going bankrupt because they got a sickness, health conditions, and health should be our fundamental human right. So we make sure through these evaluation processes as they develop the literature review where the sort of gaps are in the literature. So, for instance, if you talk about trauma, can you also talk about collective trauma? We have individual trauma, but those who are generationally marginalized or disenfranchised, like Native American population, African American population, and women, or maybe individuals with the different, the LGBTQ population, or those who have been historically relegated to poor economic conditions because of the occupations they are in, or rural resentment, that arises from rural parts of the United States not having the reflection of this vast wealth that United States as a nation has. And so all of those factors, we help our students to understand the competencies of diversity, equity, inclusion, and human rights framework, or not just as a programmatic mission and programmatic dimension, but in everything they do. So that is an aspect of the, process of learning that I believe has to take place at every level, not just in social work or in law. In law, I worked at the clinic, for instance, and we had the law clinic at our university, we had immigrants who had, issues of immigration. And another part of the clinic, I didn't work with that part, had, custody, parental rights. And one part which I worked on was helping families file their taxes, and so you listen to them. These families, they barely make anything and they still have to file taxes, and sometimes they're living on retirement and their taxes, or like, and maybe they have a little bit of pension, like $5,000, and they don't even know how they're going to pay it. So they have to set up a payment system, all of that. And so you begin to understand that the entire society is constructed on the principle of maximum benefit of value claiming in negotiation. You have learned, right? And we have both sort of, we understand negotiation principles. We have value claiming and value creating and subjective value. Value claiming is claiming most of the products for oneself, and value creating is joint benefit. And subjective value is the satisfaction we get. I realize our society's power structures are constructed in such a way that in the top 1%, as Senator Sanders would say, or the top 10%, have arranged the system so they can gain the maximum value of the society for themselves. And then the value creation, creating joint value for all of American families and children, is somehow given lip service, but it's really not fully integrated into our lives. If we did that, we would have maternity benefits, just as Scandinavian countries have. We would have extended time where both fathers and mothers can stay at home up to 1 year or 2 years to help our children, make strong bonds. Attachment theory, Bowlby's attachment theory is about all that. Children need to be attached securely without having separation anxiety. The point is, we have all the knowledge. We know what to do in terms of implementing them and translating them into social policies. So we are not constantly doing band-aid at the tip of the iceberg, where we are simply alleviating troubles, curing to some extent, but not engaging in preventive. In my doctoral program, I did a study on, one of my qualifying papers was home visiting to prevent child abuse. And I actually studied the Hawaii's Healthy Start program, at that time. But Tom Brokaw, well, I don't know whether you remember, this was in the 90s, had a segment on how Hawaii has prevented child abuse through their home visiting prevention program, almost to non-existent level. I was so impressed with that. I said, this is what I want to study. And my professor, that was his specialty too, and he had studied the home visiting program in other parts of the country and the respite care program in Sweden. So he was very supportive of that. And when I studied that, and at that time, yeah, the mainland was also impressed with the success of Hawaii's program and implemented it in 22 different sites. We thought, that's it, home visiting and categorizing, families, even as they go through prenatal care in terms of, what are the risk factors? How can we help them services to, prevent those risk factors from becoming obstacles for child health and child, better home environment. But they did not succeed in the mainland. They succeeded in Hawaii because Hawaii had near universal health care at that time, and they had allocated sufficient amount of funds for the program. We did not have universal health care. We had Medicaid for most of those families, or in California, we called it as Medi-Cal. And we had some other, CHIP, like Child Health Insurance Program, which the state had to spend by certain time. Otherwise, they had to return the program, and immigrant families would not utilize the services for fear of being deported. So this sense of having policies piecemeal without trying to understand the lived-in experiences of uh, individuals who contribute to the economy, who work, who want to live by their best effort was so abysmal. It just, was. So the value claiming was all done by the top economic group. The shared value creation, which we value in negotiation principles, was done simply as an alleviating progress. And the subjective experience, the process, the satisfaction of everyone winning in the American society, in achieving the American dream, was not even given consideration seriously enough to say, how do we help our children so we don't have the school to prison pipeline? My youngest one he's a very soft person, my youngest son, and he was bullied at school. So he didn't even tell me until I was like, he was asking for money. And I'm like, he's the person who was not interested in money at all. I said, is everything okay? And one day, and he said, no, so and so asked for money, and if I don't give them, they're going to throw my bag in the toilet. I said, what? what? And so I immediately went to the school and talked to the principal, and they went to the students who were asking for money, their lockers, and actually found the money that they were having because they were afraid to take it to their home too. So the principal was, oh, I'm going to call for a parent meeting. Would you be interested in talking to the parents? Because you have expertise in this area. Of course, I was a professor, so I said, look, I really value the trust you place on me, but you have no idea how heartbroken I am that my child was going through this in the school without without anyone noticing it. And so, if you think I'm going to be as equanimous as being able to address the parents of my child's extortioners because they were extortioning money from him, but immediately after I realized what has happened, it would be difficult. So then I thought, these are the principals of schools and so I mean, there are 90% of our school principals are in California, especially outstanding. They're excellent. They do a fabulous job. But there are some who get in there without the necessary training and the sensitivity to, children's needs, parents' needs. And then I said, so they said, what would you advise? I said, no, it's your school's policy. I am not here to advise you on how you should do that. And guess what they did? They suspended the children. They are also children. They're perpetrators of bullying, but they're children too. Suspended them. And what do children do when schools suspend them? Their parents are working full time just to put food on the table. So children go to the mall, Arden Mall in Sacramento, and they hang around there until their parents can come and pick them up in the evening. Most of them do. We have data to prove that. So they say they suspended them. And if they say, well, if they repeat the behavior, they will be expelled. And when they expel, they go to alternative schools where the education quality of education is so much to be desired. So I'm saying these are the future citizens of our country, the wealthiest nation in the world. We don't even have programs and policies and services to deal with how we handle children who have developed this habit of bullying other children who are suffering because of their bullying. Just because someone's saying, oh, don't do bullying, we have laws or zero tolerance policy, that's another problematic behavior. We have children, especially minority children, who are in school to prison pipeline, and certain zip codes, we know what percentage of children are going to end up in prison. And our incarceration system is so abysmal. It's not rehabilitative, it is punitive. And so that's another reason why, I am the kind of person who observes something and I don't stop there. I don't blame the system. I tried. So I educated myself on, instead of retributive justice, restorative justice. How do you restore, on those who engage in problematic behavior and those who are victims to have a dialogue that is being, mediated by trained mediators who are aware of trauma conscious approach. I mean, we have trauma informed approach, but my colleague and I actually just, finished about half of the article, which we initially started as a scoping review, as restorative justice and victim offender mediation in restorative justice with a trauma conscious approach. But we need cases, actual cases, to be able to develop the variables, which is what we are working on, the second part. So I continuously, research and educate myself. And so that's what, keeps me and sort of valuing the time on earth. And that's one thing as I am getting older, is acutely aware of is the mortality of human beings. And so I told you, I completed this leadership and negotiation executive course at Harvard and organized by Harvard Law just like 2 weeks ago. And there were executives from different parts of the world, Europe, Latin America, Africa. And it was such an amazing gathering of people committed to the notion of negotiation, power of negotiation. So one day we were having breakfast, and so they were saying, oh, how do you see negotiation going? Someone asked, someone from Germany, because I was a Fulbright scholar in Germany. And so we're talking about the German system and what ADF is doing in this, very AFD, sorry, not ADF, this ultra right, almost neo-Nazi party that took about nearly 20% of the votes, and which apparently some individuals from our own country United States support it. And anyway, so we were talking about it, and so they were asking, where do you see this going? I said, I don't know. I think maximum, maybe even if I live to be 100 years old, I have, about 3 decades more on this earth. Those trees, there are a lot of trees outside the window, are going to be here, and I'll be gone. And so I don't, place a premium on my predictions of where things are going to go. I think it's our collective responsibility in terms of every day asking ourselves, are we tarrying backwards, or are we moving forward with what we know to be in the best interest of that extraordinary human being that each of us is? That's where my heart is. And that's where am I capable of maintaining that frame of mind all the time? Absolutely not, when I am like almost like a lioness protecting my children, my grandchildren. And so those are the things that, I need to, see sort of how world is going. So I'm not so worried about me in this world. I've lived a full life, but my children and grandchildren, what kind of country, this is our home, United States of America. What kind of country are they going to inherit? And so, it just uh, disconcerting based on what's happening now. And so I believe there's a greater time. There's never been a greater time than now for spiritual intelligence, for negotiation, for conflict resolution, for, collaborative working relationships, and valuing a loving approach, to processes and to our encounters. And those are really important processes to master in school, in college, and even in our workplaces. So I'm also organizational, consultant. So I want this, dispute developing mechanisms, resolving mechanism in our organizations as well. To how do we manage change? How do we make every member of an organization feel valued so they can, have a sense of safety when they come to work, and a sense of pride in what they contribute, and a sense of job satisfaction that pervades, leaves, doesn't just leave their workplace, but they can take it home and not having to displace their frustration on their family. So these things are related, and I think we need to be able to understand that. And so, I'm sure you do. So I'm preaching to the choir here.
No, no, thank you. But I know those watching or listening are learning a lot today. So greatly
Oh,
appreciate
thank you.
everything you have to share with us. I wonder what kind of advice would you give to young professionals hoping to create positive change in society while still staying grounded in compassion and integrity?
It's my children's in the generation Y, the millennials, those who were born after 1983. They are dealing with a lot because they are the ones, like my daughter, for instance, a parent, and my son-in-law. They are young parents and trying to navigate the challenges of a preschool and kindergarten, and while trying to be professionals and doing their best, and cost of living has gone up tremendously, and they are almost overwhelmed by giving the best opportunities for their children, and at the same time, putting money for college, and so their children don't have to take huge student loans and all of that. And it's too much to expect them to be able to consciously participate in the governing mechanisms, in a way that could bring about social change. But I'm not saying that they're not, it's not happening, it's happening, but it's not as much as we would expect. The current generation in their, early 20s, with the TikTok generation, as they would like to call them, and the so-called, thought leaders and influential, who considers themselves as person of influencing others, are actually, in my view, doing more harm than good for our society, because there is so much valuation placed on external criteria, and in the likes, how many likes they get on their postings, and how they present themselves to the external world. The external locus of control takes over, and the internal locus of control is minimal. And so when you have internal locus of control at a minimal level, your capacity to anchor yourself in positive frame of appreciating everyone else. As anchoring is a process, we use a negotiation. When before we start, we anchor ourselves in shared interest. So my question is, what are the shared interests of this young generation? Is it just the need to be seen as popular, as interesting, as presenting a outward appearance that of being accepted, or as having an internal locus of control where they know who they are, they feel comfortable, they feel secure in their environment, they are not avoiding conflict, they are approaching conflict with a healthy frame of mind. And so if somebody is being bullied in their school as a high schooler, are they going to go up and say, "Hey, buddy, can I help you?" And what's going on in a non-threatening way? I mean, we have peer mediation in schools as part of the, peer. My daughter was a peer mediator, for instance, when she was in high school. But we are not doing enough to enrich the internal processes of our children so their internal locus of control would be high. So when they come to college, like my students, for instance, undergraduate students, I see a progression. Before in the early 2000 at Sac State, when my students come, they would talk to each other before I start the lecture, and they would just chat. It's like everybody is talking. Now I enter a classroom before online classes started because of COVID. They're all on their cell phones, doing something or the other. They're not talking to each other as much. Even when the class ends, they whip up their cell phone and they are on their cell phone walking. Very rarely they have interactions. So I think the advice for young youth is build that network, build that friends, even if don't expect your friends to be transactional. Don't have transactional friendships like I do this for you, quid pro quo. No, appreciate your friends, even if they have, in their view, nothing to offer them. I think everybody has something to offer. But, when they begin to see people in transactional point of view, they form friendships and alliances. What that person has to offer? And so that kind of approach is not helping communities. And many of those who engage in that approach are actually very lonely. They end up as isolated, lonely individuals not fitting in. And the need for mental health services, I can speak for California, has gone up tremendously among young persons. They are suffering, the lack of clarity in their mind as to what they want to do in life, and also expectations of parents, without really being fully available to their children, is also increasing. And so we have this, sort of this pull from different angles of our youth, and that young professionals, even when they reach, like, go to law school and get a law degree, and maybe in Asian families, especially, you have to be a lawyer or a doctor, and in America, or something engineer. And so some of their natural inclinations are not in that direction. They want to, study art, but there is not that much engagement. So it's like every parent should read Khalil Gibran's poem about their children, not trying to make their children like them, but love them, but not to, impose our thoughts on them. And for young professionals to know that they have this independence of spirit, this coherence that they can preserve. They don't have to, their posts don't have to be like beautiful and novel and to be liked, and their value does not depend upon social media validations. And so and their career doesn't have to be based on monetary remuneration. That is one aspect of it. Of course, money is important. But there's another thing my mother told me, and this is I told my children too. Even the great Alexander, when he was dying, I think I shared with you the other day, he called his generals, and because he was conquering, in the process of conquering India, that's where he went, and he was dying. He called them and said, "When you bury me, I want you to leave my hands outside my coffin if I die before we reach home." And they said, "Why?" And he said, apparently, that I want the world to know that even the great Alexander who conquered the world left this world empty handed. because nothing he could take with him except how he lived his life. And that's what I told myself. And my mom's story was phenomenal. I mean, again, she was, and she is, she's no more, but I feel like she's with me all the time. Such a phenomenal influence on my life. And my father, too, very funny and very sort of powerful man, but respected me, like every time I came home from these Catholic girls' colleges, which was very often they brought me home as much because I missed home, like sometimes twice a month. And he would take my hand and kiss me and never call me by my name, always like, oh, apple of my eye, and what do you need? And this and that. That kind of love is very, sort of protective. And then, but they did some things expected of society, and which I don't want to go into detail there here, but because that would be a different session. But they helped me too get out of it and, defying their entire joint family of brothers and sisters. So, and my father would like crack jokes about, Christianity too. And so he is very sort of this humor, love, and all this protectiveness that gave me a sense of who I was. To me, how I live my life is very important. And my younger son is exactly like that. If his friends needed money, he would give it if that was his last dollar. And my older son, who is a lot, gets impatient with him and say, Saji, you can't be doing that. You're an adult now. You have to tell them nicely that, and blah, blah, blah. And so I'm like, it's okay. I mean, even when I was raising them, we had a basketball hoop in our home in Sacramento, and the ball would be outside by the hoop. And if someone took it, and my sons would be angry, who took the basketball? I said, well, someone who needed it more than you did. And so let's go to the mall and get a ball. And so, that kind of approach, like not be so sweating the loss of a basketball that someone picked up, that helped my children too. And so living your life by a sense of, not that I was rich, I was suffering, I was struggling too as a single mom, but to, not to want too much and not to be able to, give your economic achievements as the yardstick of your worth. That who you are as a person means so much. And my kids have gotten that. And I think that's very important for me. And that is the advice. If I'm capable of giving any advice to anybody, I would say do that and have your interactions as based on love. But are you going to be annoyed by some behaviors? Absolutely. It annoys me sometimes, some behavior that people do, and especially boundary violations. And so, but we can deal with that too in a respectful way. And so, one doesn't have to be mean about that. And so,
Thank you so much for just taking on us on this beautiful conversation today. I have deeply appreciated learning more about the wonderful, not only your life, but your ongoing work that you're doing. There's just such good energy, and I think I commend you for that. And I imagine those around you notice it, and that probably also gives them. It's contagious. That's what I'm getting at. And so,
oh,
um,
absolutely. Yeah.
even though, yeah, there are challenges that come up across our lives, you have risen way above them and never let them, yes, everyone, and I say this more of uh, just for those that are listening, we talked a little bit about we're our own worst critic. I mentioned it, but also just ways to how do we handle those difficult times in our lives? And yes, we go through the emotions. Yes, we go through the grieving process. Uh, but overall, focusing on what's positive, what still keeps us here, and
Yeah.
the happiness, the joy, the
Mhm.
the community, the family, the love. So thank you for that. And I feel like in a way the conversation itself has been a wonderful insight into spiritual intelligence, which is
Yes.
what you encourage us to have a conversation about. And I'm very and I love how you you're like, well, some people, rather talk about integrative. There's lots of terminologies, but at the end of the
Mhm.
day, you
Yeah.
know, if something's a certain color, you color it by that color. Not like, oh, maybe it's a little shade this way or
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
So, You've answered the questions I had today. Thank you so much for everything. I wonder just briefly if you have if you want to share any current projects, collaborations, areas of research
Mhm.
you're especially excited about, as well as just
Yeah, yeah,
as
absolutely.
yeah. Uh,
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm writing this. We are writing, my colleague and I. I mean, he's still full-time teaches. He's going to retire, and we have been there. He's been there for same time. He came a year after I did, and so he is very interested in restorative justice as well. And he actually goes to the prison there in Sacramento and practices restorative justice. And so we are writing this article on, victim offender mediation with a trauma conscious approach in restorative justice. Our hypothesis being, I mean, trauma informed approach is something that has been talked about a lot. Everything is trauma. I mean, the human being entering the world through a narrow birth canal is traumatic. And then our trauma starts from then onwards, every time you're separated from our mother and all of that. But not everybody is traumatized, right? There's also post traumatic growth that happens. So just presume that all individuals who are incarcerated, let's say, or who are suffering or impacted by trauma negatively, is to discount their capacity for growth. So, for instance, many years ago, when 3 years after 3 or 4 years after I started this, no, just 1 second, I need to turn this on. Yeah, my power source, I keep forgetting to do that. And so it's on now. And so my student wrote her thesis, not thesis, the capstone project on reconciliation among the survivors of Rwandan genocide. She was one person in her entire family, nuclear family, to survive the in the clash between the Tutsis and the Hutsi, only because she was in a school in a different country at that time, not just in country, but her aunts and uncles survived, but she immigrated to United States, and there's a population of survivors. So her capstone project was on how do we explain the post-traumatic growth that has happened among survivors, and what does reconciliation play? So in this article that I'm working with my colleague, we are saying we need to move beyond trauma-informed approach to trauma-conscious approach, where we say we acknowledge that trauma could be present, but trauma-informed approach has a capacity to treat individuals from a deficit-oriented point of view. But we are saying, they have survived this trauma. They are the strongest individuals possibly we can find. And so be conscious of the trauma, but from an empowerment, post-traumatic growth approach. And what does post-traumatic growth entail? And how do we look at the various theoretical components, whether it's systems theory, whether it's symbiotic theory, or whether it's social exchange theory, in the context of trauma conscious approach when we work for restorative justice. So that I'm very proud of. Another one that we both started working on is we called it actually as integrative intelligence, believe it or not, only because we didn't want to title it as spiritual intelligence. So integrative intelligence for positive learning. That was the topic. How do we help our students to learn with a positive approach instead of treating it as a stressful experience, like, oh, I have to read this, I have to read that. Instead of that, you integrate everything you learn and you internalize it with a sufficient capacity for processing. So the teachers play a huge role in providing opportunities that remove fear from that. So we are sort of stalled on that project only because I'm still helping in some way, indirect or the other, through him in the accreditation process before directly, and now, because I have other things to do as well. And we are coming up for accreditation. So I have completed the accreditation speaking of learning, for faculty in the provided by the Council of Social Work Education, it requires a lot of modules to go through based on our recent standards, most recent standards, 2022 standards, which I absolutely love. They specify racial justice, anti-racist diversity, equity, inclusion approach, and human rights approach, not as a way of excluding anyone, but as a way of integrating our society. So, because we are involved in it, and we have stalled the work on it, but we want to finish the article first using the cases that we know, and then we are going to move toward that. But I'm also involved in an organization called Foreign Policy for America. It's a nonprofit organization, so it's based in Washington D.C. and it has members all over the country. And we just had our summit last week here in Washington D.C. So as part of the summit, the group of us went to the Hill in small groups and met with either chief of staff or the legislative, person, and with the various, representatives office, and talking about USAID fund cutting the funds and soft power of United States, how it is declining, and so overall factors. So in that context, I also want to write about, based on my fellow members' experiences, what it happens to a society when, the messaging is done in a way that the American public cannot see the value of important entities such as what USAID was doing. What USAID was doing was benefiting United States more than it was benefiting other countries where the service programs were going, because it paved the way for bilateral relations or multilateral relations, for M&Es from going and opening their ventures there, and for products to be less expensive for American consumers. So many things, the peace of the world, and security of the world, human security. So I want to, actually inform the persons concerned, so especially Democrats. I'm a registered Democrat. I have no problem in saying that. But I don't think we're doing a good job in messaging. I believe in the rule of law, absolutely, equality before the law. But for average Americans, when you keep saying, well, we want rule of law, they are struggling to put food on the table, thinking how they're going to get the money for car payments, rent, or they are being evicted. For them, it means nothing. The so-called shaman who, on January 6th riots during the last time, who broke into the Capitol, and there's a famous picture of the shaman who was like standing there at the well of the house and so shrieking. He was living with his mom because he was evicted from his apartment. I mean, think about the level of disempowerment he would feel. And so there are many in America who feel that disenfranchised, and we're not doing a good job of messaging. It's like what Nancy Pelosi, a House Speaker, I have a lot of respect for her, said, if you have public perception, you can do anything in your favor in America. If you don't, you can't do anything. So we are doing a disfavor by not messaging. So a project that I would like to work on is how do we anchor, bringing my negotiation and, principles into action. And how do you develop a framework, and what criteria you use, and how do you set up the process of your messaging itself based on whom you are messaging to, so that we can see ourselves as a united nation, United States of America, not as Republicans, not as Democrats. In fact, that was one of my message consistently to every office that I visited. Please help them work across the aisle, bipartisan work. So that's the next thing I would like to work on. If you're interested, let me know. Or anyone else who might be interested in how do we bring about unity between Republicans and Democrats, and between two oppressed groups who are killing each other in Gaza. As part of my international law program, I lived in Krakow, Poland, and visited the Auschwitz and Birkenau and other things. And I was in Rome and saw the ghettos, quote unquote, of how much the Jewish population has suffered, and how much the Palestinian population has suffered. And they're fighting each other, killing each other. It makes absolutely no sense. To me, how do we bring them together? Likewise, the Ukrainians and the Russians. I mean, Russians suffered so much under totalitarianism. And so if we have spiritual intelligence, we can appreciate free enterprise without this extreme inequality, and we will prevent extreme inequality that exists in capitalistic society like ours. And we can also appreciate how important it is to protect ourselves from the inroads of totalitarianism and communism and other forms of government. So, how do we bring these individuals together and not to fall prey for a few bad faith actors with vested interests who take the power and then use the rest of the country and the world as their chess pieces, and destroying peace and bringing so much suffering. And so I really would like to work toward. That's why I am constantly, inspired by anyone who does peace work. And, I love our, mediation beyond borders international, although I, need to learn more what they're doing. I love United Nations, and I really want to encourage, international Court of Justice and International Criminal Court to have more power, and United States and Israel to be part of that process as well. And although these are two countries that have robust judicial system, and we could still support the efforts of ICC in terms of bringing bad faith actors to account to justice, accountable, and the same thing with International Court of Justice, which resolves disputes between states, and International Criminal Court, you know, solves problems between individuals, for specific like war crimes, genocide, and crimes of aggression, and crimes against humanity. And so these are happening in the world. And although we have all these frameworks, our hands are tied, and we allow 20,000 children Ukrainian children have been taken to Russia and indoctrinated into their system. I mean, how about their suffering? And children, a doctor in Gaza lost 9 of his children just the day before yesterday. And 1,200 is members of Israeli Jewish population were, murdered, and horrible things happened to them that started on October 7th. So these are issues that we cannot take a position on, but you can understand we all have collective shared interest, which is the shared interest of protecting all children, all members of the community, and that we prevent these populations from annihilating each other without having this respect for the extraordinary human being that each of us is. And how do we help them realize that no one has the right to die, a right to, cause the death of another person in a way, and no one deserves to die in such a shocking, violent manner. Everybody has the right to live their life to its fullest self-actualized potential. And we need to go back to ancient wisdom too, in terms of self-actualization and Maslow's hierarchy of needs and all that. I can, of course, yes, you can see, very passionate about it and talk about how much we know and what a wonderful society we can have if only we create the will and the messaging to everyone. Who's going to do that? That's my question.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
rounding us out and with, well, amazing that you have so many wonderful collaborations. Please, um, always open to explore ways to collaborate. I think that's truly how we're going to find some common ground uh,
Yeah.
once we actually start giving
Yeah,
collaboration a
absolutely.
try, which is
Yeah.
easier said than done. I've
Mm.
learned. But no, thank you for everything today. Thank you for your time, for your grace, for your knowledge, your wisdom, and I look forward to our future conversations as well. Thank you again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good weekend.
Yeah, you
Thank
too.
you.
Take care.
You too.